Story 1. I slipped on wet tiles and slammed my big toe into the sharp edge of an aluminum door. The toenail was split across the middle and bled heavily. The pain was so intense that my vision briefly blacked out. Story 2. I had an abscessed tooth and endured the pain for 26 hours. I was waiting 3 more days for insurance to kick in, but I couldn't wait. Some people call it the suicide disease. After 12 out of 10 pain, I can understand why. No one can think straight in that situation. The painkillers I usually took did not work. I went straight to the nearest dentist the moment they opened, begging them to remove the tooth. I had no fear of the extraction and was relieved when they injected anesthetic into the painful spot 3 times. I was ecstatic when I saw the forceps. When they pulled it and it made a cracking sound as they twisted and turned it, I felt intense relief. I didn't care that it cost several $100s out of pocket. The pain is gone. Story 3. Endometriosis, period pain, intrauterine device insertion, or both. Story 4. Menstrual cycles with adenomyosis. My endometrial tissue grows into my uterine muscles. There are days when I cannot move without almost passing out and vomiting from the pain. Story 5. I have trigeminal neuralgia, along with occipital neuralgia and chronic migraines. I always experience an unfortunate combination of all 3. Feels like an electrical fire running through my jaw, cheekbones, and temples, with zapping and stabbing pain in the back of my head from the occipital neuralgia. Sometimes it feels as if knives are stabbing the base of my skull. I thought I knew what a 10 on the pain scale was because I have always had severe migraines, but I was wrong. Cannabis no longer relieves the pain, and no doctor has offered anything that provides relief. I have been dealing with this for years, and it keeps getting worse. I cannot imagine living the rest of my life like this. But I try to make it through each day without giving up so I do not hurt the people I love. Story 6. I dislocated my kneecap and had to manually put it back into place. Story 7. Period cramps from endometriosis feel like being stabbed in the asshole, and nothing relieves the pain. Story 8. I had reconstructive foot surgery this past year. The doctor performed a nerve block so I would not feel pain for the first 24 to 48 hours. I woke up from surgery and felt everything. The nerve block did not take. I was crying, and the staff thought it was from emergence from anesthesia, but I was actually in severe pain. They gave me 3 types of pain medication through my intravenous line, and none touched the pain. The final drug was fentanyl, and the nurse said I should stop feeling pain in about 30 to 45 seconds. She had me count down because I was hyperventilating. It did not work. The anesthesiologist came to recovery and said he sees this often and that it was obvious I had a high tolerance for medications meant for pain relief. I was sent home with the hope I would get some relief. That night I was in a lot of pain, but not a 10 out of 10. The next day was the worst pain of my life. I cried nonstop unless I fell asleep for a couple of minutes for about 18 hours. The nerve pain was so bad it felt like it was shooting into my other foot. I alternated Tylenol 3 and ibuprofen every 2 hours for about 2 weeks as instructed by the doctor, and it never seemed to work. A few weeks ago I had a double ear infection and the doctor told me my ears were so infected she was confused why my pain level was not at least 8 to 10, because I said 4 to 5. That was when I realized my post-surgical pain had been the worst pain I have ever experienced. Story 9. When I accidentally slammed my pinky toe at full speed into the corner of a metal bed frame, I saw stars. Story 10. Uterine biopsy. The just grit your teeth and breathe pain control they give women is really something. Story 11. I had an abscessed tooth. It had been aching dully for a week, then turned to utter agony over the course of a day. Late in the evening, I was taking handfuls of paracetamol, ibuprofen, kratom, and cannabis and dousing my mouth in clove oil, but it barely made a dent. I planned to go to the dentist the next morning, but at 2 in the morning I had to go to the emergency room because the pain was becoming unbearable and I felt suicidal. I had already decided that if they did not give me opioids at the emergency room, I would call a man I knew who sold heroin. Fortunately, they gave me oxycodone and antibiotics at the emergency room, and the next day an endodontist filed the tooth down so it would not hit the opposite tooth until I could get it pulled. Imagine the worst toothache, the worst ear infection, and the worst migraine all at once. That is how it felt. Story 12. This will pale in comparison to many others. The short-term pain felt like dipping my hand in a fryer. In the long term, about 6 months later, 3 ribs were dislocated from the cartilage. Story 13. The tumor was growing in the bone of my arm. When the bone broke, it was far worse than a regular fracture. Story 14. A speck in my eye. A sinus infection was so bad that my face swelled with pockets of infection that pushed into my teeth. Those were the absolute worst. Keep in mind, I have given birth to 3 children, one by cesarean section with only an increased epidural rather than a spinal block. Story 15. I have experienced kidney stones, gallstones, which I did not have treated for 2 years because I was a minor. I had 3 to 5 attacks per week. Endometriosis. 1 ovary fused to my bowel, although not with endometrial tissue. Polycystic ovary syndrome, also known as hundreds of cysts of varying sizes on my ovaries that can and do burst. 4 years of debilitating back pain following surgery. All of this occurred before I was 25. Story 16. Kidney stone. 1 minute I thought I had a little gas. 2 hours later I was on the bathroom floor, shivering. I went to the emergency room and could not even sit on the bed until they gave me Dilaudid. My wife convinced me to go to the hospital by saying, "2 months ago I watched you break your ankle and laugh about it. Look at you now. Something is not right." They gave me a small coffee filter cup to urinate into until the stone passed so they could analyze it. The stone was about the size of the period key on my phone keyboard. I cannot imagine the pain people have with larger stones. Story 17. Gout. At first, the emergency room did not believe it was gout because I was only 22, so they pulled and tugged on my big toe while they took an x-ray and I screamed in pain. It turned out I needed to lay off red meat because my genetics predisposed me to form urate crystals in my joints. Story 18. Muscle spasms are not life-threatening, but they can be extremely painful and may last for days. Story 19. Many years ago, my eye was cut and became infected. It felt like someone was inside my head, stabbing my eye with a machete. I honestly thought I was going to lose my mind. Since then, I have had a baby and a kidney stone. Neither was as bad as being poked in the eye with a sharp stick. Story 20. I was bitten by a yellow scorpion in the desert. It took more than an hour to drive to the nearest hospital. Even after receiving antivenom and pain medication, I experienced tingling and numbness for 2 days. Story 21. I punctured my heart and lung during a pacemaker implant at age 34. My lung collapsed, and fluid began building up in the chest cavity and around my heart. Internal bleeding caused a hematoma the size of a cantaloupe at the pacemaker generator site. Recovery took 6 months. The fluid around my heart was the worst part. It caused a pressure-like pain that worsened whenever I moved. Story 22. The worst part was when the nerve block wore off after surgery, not the ruptured Achilles. Story 23. Dye was injected into breast tissue to trace lymph nodes before breast cancer surgery. They mentioned it would be uncomfortable, which was a massive understatement. Story 24. I woke up one morning and couldn't move my neck without pain. Story 25. Stepping on a Lego brick at 2 in the morning, barefoot, I saw the face of God that night. Story 26. My ankle rolled back into place after I broke it. I almost passed out from the pain. Story 27. A finger through a bandsaw was closely followed by heartbreak. Story 28. I had pancreatitis after gallstones blocked my pancreas. The doctor said stomach acid was actually dissolving it. I kept throwing up, and the back pain felt like a Viking performing the blood eagle, as if someone reached in and was pulling my spine out. Nothing has been that bad for me. I spent 16 days in the hospital. Story 29. My bowels stopped moving. I felt the food inside me either stop and begin to solidify or slowly inch its way through my intestines. Everything became inconsequential. All I had was the next breath, the next heartbeat, the next clench. It was not a searing, howling pain, but it encompassed my whole being and separated me from reality. I have also had a kidney stone, which I think was similar, although pain is hard to remember past a certain threshold. One minute I thought the dumpling was not agreeing with me, and the next I was not taking in any information from the person speaking to me. I slid down against my desk and just started breathing, living moment to moment for the next few hours. I remember being put in an emergency room wheelchair. I slid out of the wheelchair when it stopped because lying on the floor made more sense. I kicked off my pants when I crawled into the hospital bed. Someone had mentioned that when they had a kidney stone, they received painkillers injected into their buttocks, and my absent brain seemed to decide to remove the obstruction. After about 5 minutes on the gurney, I rolled over and the pain evaporated. The stone passed from the kidney into the bladder, and once that happens, I was basically fine. When I urinated, a small sesame seed-looking object came out. I took a photo and showed the doctor. They said that was the stone and that the absence of blood was excellent news, so I could leave. Story 30. I had an abscess tooth. The pain was worse than giving birth to my daughter. Story 31. Broken ribs. It doesn't hurt so long as you don't move, breathe, laugh, roll over, eat, get up, drink, cough, shower, or dress. Story 32. I broke a bone in my foot. I nearly fainted from the immediate pain. Story 33. My cat got caught upside down in the blinds because he is an idiot. I heard it through a closed door, found him panicking, and tried to help. Now I know when this happens. Throw a blanket over the cat or cut the blind string. The cat had bitten me and I did not realize how many claws had dug into my leg. I ignored it until an abscess developed and went to urgent care. The person who examined me immediately said to go to the emergency department, and I replied that I could not afford it. With some texted advice from my mother-in-law, who has more than 25 years of experience as a nurse, we convinced the clinician to help. He did not want to do it, probably because his shift was almost over. The clinician tried lidocaine around the area to numb it before draining, but it had gotten so bad that the lidocaine leaked out whenever he tried to inject. After 7 or 8 syringes, I said, "Just do it." The incision was not the worst pain. It was the foot of packing he shoved into the 1-inch wide void that had been created in my leg. I still have the leg, though. Story 34. When my tubal pregnancy ruptured, I had emergency surgery and healed perfectly, but the pain was intense. It was in 1981, and you never forget that pain. Story 35. I experienced the catastrophic failure of an old firearm. Part of the action blew backward and sliced my right cheek open. I now have a scar from just under my right nostril to my right ear, a near-perfect straight line. Story 36. My ovarian cyst ruptured at work. I had more pain from that than from childbirth. Story 37. Testicular torsion. The doctor explained that to correct it, they will attempt to manually detorse the testicle by massaging it. If that does not work, surgery will be required. Story 38. Diverticulitis caused severe intestinal cramps that were far worse than those from a stomach bug. I had a rib broken in 2. I could feel the 2 broken ends rubbing together with every breath. Holding my breath was the only way to avoid the bone pain, but the diverticulitis was 10 times worse. Story 39. I had testicular torsion as a child. My parents didn't believe me and sent me to school. The school nurse did, however, and took me to the emergency room. Story 40. Severe menstrual cramps cause my entire body to go numb. Temporomandibular joint pain causes jaw pain and migraines at the same time. Story 41. I'm sorry you're in such severe pain. Are you thinking about hurting yourself right now? If you are in immediate danger, call your local emergency number now, for example, 911 in the United States. If you are in the United States and need to talk to someone right away, call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are elsewhere, please contact your local emergency services or search for your country's suicide prevention or crisis hotline, or contact a trusted person and a healthcare professional. Edited text for text-to-speech. Trigeminal neuralgia feels like being electrocuted in the face. During severe attacks, I have wanted to end my life to escape the pain. If you want, I can help find local crisis numbers, contact a loved one, or make other edits to this text. Story 42. I'm male. I had a urinary tract infection a couple of years ago, and it hurt so much to urinate that I was crying when I had to provide a urine sample at the doctor's office. I nearly collapsed in the bathroom because my legs gave out. Story 43. I have never broken any bones, so I will probably get a half-arm tattoo. Story 44. I had a cracked tooth. I was only 6 or 7, and all I did was bite down on a chicken drumstick. I felt like I had been shot. I screamed and cried, but there was no bleeding. Dad raced to the local dentist, who placed a metal filling. I could really feel the injection. Story 45. I was stung by a stingray just below my kneecap. 7 years later, my knee still hurts if I overdo it. Story 46. I had appendicitis. My appendix was lodged under my liver, so it took a long time to diagnose. Felt like I was being stabbed in the side every time I breathed. Story 47. I have peripheral nerve pain in my back. I've given birth twice without an epidural. I would go through childbirth 10 times over rather than experience peripheral nerve pain again. Story 48. I was blown up in Iraq. I thought the pain was over until I reached the medical center. Having my finger blasted 3 knuckles deep into my new armhole was only slightly less painful than being scrubbed with a grill brush to remove burnt skin. If you ever find yourself in this situation, do not try to be a tough guy and say you are a 6 on the pain scale. Story 49. Gout is worse than childbirth, and I have had 2 10-pound babies. Story 50. I had a cesarean section when the spinal anesthetic did not take effect. The anesthesiologist forgot to perform a pinprick test on my shoulder and leg to ensure an adequate block. The obstetrician started cutting, and it was the worst searing pain, 1,000 times worse than a deep paper cut. It was worse than my gallbladder attack, my ruptured appendix, and my ovarian cysts. Story 51. I thought it was childbirth without painkillers until I experienced cholecystitis, an inflammation of the gallbladder caused by gallstones. Even morphine struggled to relieve the pain. Story 52. I was stung by a weaver fish, which is poisonous, and I also had an allergic reaction. I am glad I passed out after a few minutes because the pain was intense. Story 53. Gallstones. That was by far the worst pain I have ever felt, like someone twisting a knife into my lower rib cage. They gave me morphine, which barely touched the pain. When they finally performed an ultrasound in the emergency room, the technician must have pressed on my gallbladder just right to dislodge the stone, and the pain almost immediately subsided. I had the gallbladder removed several weeks later. Story 54. Kidney stones, falling down the stairs, and landing on your tailbone. Story 55. When I had a medical abortion using pills rather than suction or surgery, the pain medication wore off. I got up to go to the bathroom and almost passed out. I spent an hour on the floor in the worst pain I had ever felt, unable to even use my phone to text or look anything up. Story 56. Man, I can't even choose. Here are my top 3, laughing out loud. 1. I was getting my wisdom tooth removed and it was hardly numbed. The dentist didn't believe me when I said I could feel it. 2. An ovarian cyst ruptured. The emergency room doctor, who was a woman, asked if I was sure it wasn't just my period starting. 3. I fractured 3 ribs during wrestling practice in middle school. It felt like I couldn't breathe, and everyone was just staring at me. Every movement, including breathing and swallowing, hurt so much that I often choked when drinking water. Story 57. A bad cavity that was not treated for months. Kids, I am not kidding. Any tooth-related pain can be intense. Make sure to brush, floss, and see your dentist regularly. It is no joke. Story 58. I opted to have 6 removed to alter the shape of my waist. The night after the procedure, I was up all night in the hospital because of another patient causing problems. When I got home to the Airbnb, I was exhausted and disoriented because of pain medication and other drugs. I tried to lie down on my own and rolled onto my side without thinking. Immediately, I felt a searing, hot pain from my back to my front, like someone pushing a hot piece of rebar through my torso. My reflex was to try to sit up, but my muscles were too weak from the procedure, so my body continued moving down and the pain worsened. I tried to scream but could not make a sound. I felt like I could not think and thought, I might pass out. My partner heard something and ran in to pull me back upright. She described seeing me on my side, my head slumped forward and my mouth open as if I were screaming but with no sound. She said my body was extremely stiff. I would rate the pain 10 out of 10. I think if she had not run into the room, I would have passed out. Story 59. Tooth pain. It's in your head and reaches your brain so intensely that you want to bang your head on the hardest surface. Story 60. I had a vasectomy and 2 hair transplants. They were painful but beneficial. Story 61. I am not sure what it was, but I felt an intense, lingering pain in my intestines that kept me up at night. It went away after a couple of days. Story 62. I had a total knee replacement. About 3 to 4 weeks in, it hurt so badly I cried. By week 6, I was much better. Story 63. I developed a spinal headache after a spinal tap for meningitis. I have regular migraines, but this one was unbearably painful. I don't even like thinking about how bad it hurt. They performed an epidural blood patch and I could feel the pain wash away. Story 64. A gallbladder attack or sciatica issues. I have been hit by a car and attacked by a dog. Those were still much worse. Story 65. Gout. I have broken bones and been stitched up. 214 stitches so far. I have had concussions and cracked ribs, but nothing hurt more than thousands of tiny jagged crystals tearing at me from the inside. Story 66. Gout. I thought I had somehow broken my ankle. I am not sure it compares with these other examples, but the pain was brutal. Story 67. My spinal headache was caused by a botched attempt to withdraw spinal fluid. A junior doctor pierced the membrane surrounding my spinal cord and accidentally tore it. Spinal fluid leaked out, my brain lost pressure, and the resulting headache was unbearable. If the repair had not worked, I was going to jump off a building because I could not live with that pain for another minute. The repair was unusual. They put a needle in my thigh and one in my spine, then attached the two so blood flowed from my thigh into my spinal column. The blood cells find the rupture, clot it, and allow it to heal. It worked very quickly. I have had a burst appendix, a kidney stone, and several broken bones, but nothing was as bad as the spinal headache. I would not recommend it. Story 68. Contrary to popular belief, getting shot does not hurt that much. I experienced more pain after neck surgery. Story 69. A kidney stone hurts worse than being stabbed 3 times and having a punctured lung. Story 70. My toe was almost sliced in half when I slipped on the wet stairs. Story 71. I broke my tibia skiing. It was a spiral fracture. The break was not severe, but I needed surgery to repair the bone. Surgeons inserted an intramedullary nail into my tibia through the top of my knee, and they also placed a plate in my ankle. When the initial anesthesia and pain medications wore off about 12 hours after surgery, it was the most excruciating pain I had ever felt. Story 72. A pilonidal cyst. I have a high pain tolerance, and this brought me to tears. I have broken bones, suffered dozens of sprains, dislocated my knee, fallen off steps onto a car jack, had a nail go into my knee, and this was the most painful experience I have had. Story 73. After the nerve block wore off following rotator cuff surgery, I realized I had not followed my doctor's orders to take Lortab, which contains hydrocodone and acetaminophen, every 6 hours because I was not in any pain. The pain was so severe I thought I was going to die. Story 74. I had an infected pilonidal cyst about the size of a golf ball. I am not sure because I could not quite see it, but it was very large. I was in the army, and it was very painful to the touch. They injected a numbing agent into it, but most of the pain was from the pressure of the cyst. Injecting the liquid increased the pressure, causing much more pain. I was lying face down on the medical bed with my arms wrapped around it. I squeezed the bed so hard from the pain that I cracked it. They said it was the most impacted hair they had ever seen. For reference, I have been stabbed. I broke my tibia and fibula twice, which resulted in a 1.5-inch section of each bone being detached. I was in a serious car accident in which cars caught fire, and I injured my back and could not walk for a week. That cyst was still by far the worst. Story 75. In 1980, I had a tubal pregnancy. Before ultrasound was used to diagnose a tubal blockage, they inserted a 12-inch needle through my cervix to see if blood could be drawn from my uterus. They wheeled me to the empty side of the hospital so no one could hear me scream. I was bleeding and in shock before they took me to surgery, 12 hours after admission. Oh, the good old days. Story 76. I was drunk when I broke and dislocated my ankle. It hurt a lot, but I discovered true pain after the open reduction and internal fixation surgery when the nerve block wore off. That was nothing compared to last month, when my broken tooth became infected and felt like it was trying to explode for 2 straight weeks. It got so bad that I went to the emergency room, where care is so poor that I waited 9 hours, from midnight until 9 a.m., and never got to see anyone. I was looking around thinking the staff were indifferent. I was in unbearable pain without cold water in my mouth. If I did not have this ice machine, I would probably have been screaming in pain and asking where to get fentanyl. The staff did not take me seriously, so I went to an emergency dentist and received an anesthetic injection directly into the tooth, and that was the worst pain of my life. I was so relieved when they drilled the tooth apart and removed it, one root at a time. There were 5 roots, one of which extended into my sinus. There is a reason toothache was a leading cause of death before 1900. Story 77. Gallstones are somewhat more numerous than normal because about 20 of them became lodged in the bile duct. Story 78. I ignored an infected gallbladder for far too long. If you do not have a work-life balance, your body will hit you in the face with a shovel to make you wise up. Story 79. Gallstones were among the worst pain I've ever felt. The pain made me vomit and cry because my body couldn't cope. A close second was a severe autoimmune flare-up with inflammation throughout my body. I had many flare-ups, and this was the worst. I was bedridden for over a month and could not move without intense pain. Story 80. A Foley balloon catheter is being placed during labor without an epidural. Story 81. I had a pilonidal cyst, which is a cyst at the top of the buttock crease just below the tailbone. It caused the most intense, unrelenting pain of my life. I was a teenager at the time and did not know what it was. I thought it was a large pimple, and I certainly was not about to tell anyone it was in my buttock crease. Because of its location, every time I sat down or stood up to walk, if I did not move a certain way, I would be hit with wave after wave of debilitating pain that made me fight to remain conscious. I tried to use a warm compress to make the cyst burst and drain, and I lost consciousness in the bathroom the moment the washcloth touched it. After I regained consciousness, I decided I could not handle it on my own and told my father. We were on vacation at the time, and I think he suspected something was wrong since I suddenly was not interested in going out and walking around London. We had no choice but to wait for it to drain. For the rest of my stay, I walked at a snail's pace everywhere I went. The cyst finally burst on my flight home. I will spare you the gruesome details, but I was glad the airport toilet had a bidet attachment I could use to rinse off. Even now, a decade later, I still have a small depression in the skin where the cyst cavity used to be. I feel it is appropriate that I have a reminder of something that caused me so much pain. Thankfully, it never happened again. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.